our breakfast table is starting to look a lot more populated and like a more realistic breakfast. So the next thing I'm going to show you is one more modeling technique using a different type of model. So again, I'm going to go ahead and hide all of these other models, and I'm going to go ahead and add these two models to that current hidden layer by right-clicking and saying Add Selected Objects. And just to go ahead and hide this image plane, I'll select it and hit Control H, because I don't think I'm going to need it anymore for a while. So the other kind of modeling that we're going to talk about is called NURBS modeling, N-U-R-B-S. We can find NURBS up in the Create NURBS primitives. So you'll see NURBS. That stands for Non-Uniform Rational Bezier Splines. And so NURBS objects versus polygon objects are a little different. If we click on a NURBS object and create a sphere, you'll see that it still kind of looks like the same type of object as a polygon object, except these edges are rounded. And if I right click on this object, I'm not getting vertex, edge, and face. I'm getting stuff like control vertex and isoparm. So if I choose a control vertex, you'll see that these control vertices are floating outside of this object, and they allow us to manipulate it. So this is just a slightly different kind of object inside of Maya. As a quick history of this, NURBS were objects that were able to be rendered and calculated a little more quickly because you didn't need to draw as many faces in order to create a NURBS object with a computer. As computer processing got faster, it was much easier to calculate more faces because they were easier to manipulate. So polygon modeling is actually much more popular in the entertainment industry. NURBS still has a place where precision and accuracy is really important. So you may use NURBS modeling in 3D printing or in engineering. However, we can still use it in our scene here in order to get a shape quickly. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this NURBS sphere, and we're going to talk about how to create NURBS objects. You'll see that we have our polygon modeling tab. I'm going to go to curves and surfaces. So a NURBS object is really just an object created out of multiple curves connected together. So if I were to create a NURBS circle and sort of scale that down and duplicate that, move it up, maybe over, scale it down, and do that one more time, I can create a NURBS object just by lofting all three of these objects together. I would select them in order, and then I would choose this loft button. And you'll see that Maya creates a NURBS surface out of those three curves. So the interesting thing is that those three curves still exist and the NURBS surface exists. And they're still connected together because Maya remembers how they were created. So if I select that third NURBS circle and I change it, it will still change my NURBS model. If at any point I want those curves to no longer affect the NURBS model, I just select the lofted surface and say Edit, Delete by Type, History. And now those are no longer connected. So this is just an example. Let's use NURBS to create a model that we could actually use for our breakfast scene. I'm thinking maybe a glass or a cup for our table. So this could also be a vase or something like that if you would like to use it for that. So I brought some of these objects just back for scale just to get an idea, and we'll turn those back on here in a few minutes. But from my front view, I'm going to just create a curve in the profile of the glass or cup I want to create. Now there's all sorts of different ways of making a curve. I'm going to use this third option, the EP Curve tool. And the reason for that is because Maya will allow me to snap to grid points for this. So before I do anything, I want to go ahead and hide my table as well, just so we can kind of get it out of the way. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to add it to its own layer. And I will call this temp save. And that's because I'll probably eventually end up moving that table into my models layer. And so now I can temporarily turn that on and off. So to start creating, I'm going to go to my EP curve right here. And I'm going to hold down X because X will allow me to snap to my origin point. Now I can hold down Shift and it will snap from side to side, and I can just start drawing a shape for my cup. Now if I click up here, we're going to get a little bit of a dip, but we can fix that later. And I'm just going to start drawing sort of the profile shape. What would my cup look like from the side? But I'm only going to draw half of it. So maybe I'm going to do a cup that kind of curves in just a little bit here at the top. And then I will also draw the inside of my cup. Now a lot of times the bottom of a glass is a little thicker, so I can do that. Now I need to snap to my grid again, but if I just held down X and snapped, it would snap to my origin point. And that's not necessarily what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down X and Shift at the same time, and then when I click, it will snap to the grid at the same parallel angle as my previous point. Now whenever I hit enter, my curve is complete. Now it got a little wobbly here, so I can right click and go to control vertices and adjust that just a little bit to clean up the shape. I also want to clean that up just a little bit to make it seem a little flatter on the bottom. And maybe adjust this inside edge a little bit more. Believe it or not, we are way closer to finished with this model than you might think, because I currently have half of my model, but my model is a complete radial object. It's the same no matter how you turn it from the side view. So if I select this curve and my curve's origin point is at 0, 0, 0, when I click this button, the Revolve Curve button, it will quickly create a glass out of that shape. Now, it's important to remember that this glass is made up out of this curve, which created this lofted surface. So if I select this curve and move it, it's going to really change my glass dramatically. So I can also select the control vertices on this curve and still make some major changes to my glass. So we want to be kind of careful with that. And eventually we're going to probably disconnect that. The other thing we'll point out is that this is a NURBS object. This is not a polygon object. If I needed to extrude something out of that, this is not a kind of object in which you can do that. So you may get very comfortable with polygon modeling tools and then not be able to work very comfortably with NURBS tools. The cool thing is that we can actually convert one to the other. So with the revolved surface one selected, I'm going to go to Modify, Convert, and I'm going to choose NURBS to Polygons. And I'm going to choose my options box. Now this part gets a little confusing. I want to set this from triangles to quads, and I want to make sure that my tessellation method is set to general. And I also want to make sure, and this is just a confusing phrase, per span number of isoparms. I want to make sure that this drop-down box has that bottom option selected, not per surface number isoparms in 3D. Choose per span number of isoparms. And we'll choose that on both of these. So again, quads, general, per span number of isoparms, per span number of isoparms. And now when I hit tessellate, it will give me a polygon object as well. So again, we created a curve. We revolved that curve to get a NURBS surface, and then we converted that NURBS surface to a polygon object. And Maya remembers that process and the history of our NURBS polygon object and how it came to be. So that means if I go in here and select that original curve we started with and change it, not only will it affect my NURBS model, it'll affect my polygon model. So this is very convenient if you're not 100% sure how you want this glass to look. But once you've sort of settled on what you want the final object to look like, we can select the polygon object, and then we can delete the history so it's no longer affected by those other objects. We'll go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. So now, if I adjust this curve, although it'll still affect the NURBS object, it's not going to affect my polygon object. Just in case I need it for later, I'll go ahead and select these two and hit Control-H to hide them and preserve them for later. So now if I turn on my table and I turn on my models, you'll see my cup is way too big, but I can scale this object down and make it more appropriate and level with our table.